Hello, everybody. This is Tom. Welcome to the webinar. I'm glad to see you all coming out tonight. We're going to cover SAT and ACT in just a moment. If you have any questions you'd like to interject, you want something answered, feel free to type into the chat window. So if you look, I'm not sure which side it is, but somewhere around here there's a live chat. Feel free to post questions and answers in there, and we'd be happy to take them. Also, you can email us stuff if you want to do that, or send it to us on Twitter. If you don't get your question answered tonight, you can also head over to testive.com and talk to us on the live chat, and we'd be happy to answer questions there too. So if anybody has any questions before we begin, feel free to post them over there. Danny is also with us tonight. He's going to be keeping track of that stuff. If we miss something, just go ahead and post it again. We're not ignoring you on purpose. We may just missed it. So I am going to put a presentation up on the screen. Bear with me for a moment while I get that started. All right. What we're going to cover tonight is the parent's guide to the ACT and the SAT. My name is Tom Rose. I'm one of the co-founders of Testive. Just a little background about me. I went to Duke undergrad. I did my graduate work at MIT, which is actually where I met my co-founder that I started Testive with. And so you're like, why did I start Testive? You know, before I was working here, I'm a career teacher. I've worked in K-12, classrooms, adults, little kids. I've worked at summer camps and all kinds of stuff. And by far, my favorite thing has been working one-on-one with students. And in particular, I like working with people on standardized tests. And the reason why is because I really like students that have a burning desire to learn. And for a long time, I was doing this as a private tutor and charging an enormous amount to do it. And I started to find myself being less and less satisfied with that. It was, I was starting to price most people out of the market. And also, I felt like a lot of the work that I was doing was kind of repetitive. The biggest challenge seemed to be getting students to do their homework. And, when I was able to successfully get and keep a student doing their work and focused on the right material, they were really successful. And so I started to think, can't we build a program that keeps the best parts of human tutors, but also a state-of-the-art software tool that's going to feed information over to those people so that we can help students really make a plan and stay on track. They get a lot of work done, and they can do it a lot faster and make things a lot easier. This is the way I always wanted to work when I was a tutor, is have an awesome tool like that. So that's why we started Testive. And we've been very fortunate with Testive. We work now with over 250,000 families. So I'm just very honored to be here with you tonight, and hope we can get some of your questions answered, and we can get you guys pointed in the right direction. So let's get right into it. We're here tonight to talk about the SAT and the ACT, and they matter because they affect where our children can be accepted at college. So it's a very high stress thing. So here's how we're going to cover this. We're going to break this down into, this is a 1-hour webinar, and this is what we're going to cover. How do the SAT and ACT affect college admissions? What are the parent roles in the prep process? Should my child take the SAT or the ACT? How many times should my child take the SAT or the ACT? What is the timeline? What's the best method for improving scores? And anything else that you guys want to cover, post that stuff in the live chat. Now, let's look at the anatomy of a college application and start there. A college application is not as complicated as you may think. When you start going through it, you'll realize there's really only 4 main parts to it. And I'm going to divide these in half into what I call the objective parts and the subjective parts. The objective parts are composed of your grades. So this is your GPA. And your standardized test score. So whether you took the SAT or the ACT or both, that's your standardized test score. Those 2 things, that's the objective part of your application. When I say objective, what I mean is you can use those numbers to compare you apples to apples against another applicant. Then you've got the subjective parts of your college application. The subjective parts are composed of your recommendation letter, so that's what other people think of you, and the essays that you write to those schools explaining why you want to go there and who you are. Together, that makes up your college application. And that's really all that there is to it. I mean, the only other stuff that there is demographic info. And that's your complete application. So let's take the two objective pieces, the GPA and the test scores, and let's plot them on a chart, and we'll see how they influence admissions decisions. Now, so this is a scatter plot, and one of the things that it's showing here is the relationship between GPA on the vertical axis. So as your GPA improves, you're moving higher and higher on the vertical axis, and SAT and ACT score. And we're treating those as interchangeable things, right? Whether you took the SAT or the ACT, you can map those together. And so that's the horizontal axis. So as you move right on this chart, you're seeing people with higher and higher SAT and ACT scores. Every dot on this chart is one applicant. Green and blue dots are acceptances. A blue dot is an outright acceptance. A green dot is a wait list, then an acceptance. And then the red and yellow dots, those are rejections, either an outright rejection or a wait list and then a rejection. And what I want you to see on this chart is that there's a relationship, a strong relationship between both GPA performance and standardized test score performance, and between those things and whether or not you are accepted at the school. Now, this particular chart is Boston University. Now, of course, every school has a slightly different chart, right? And one of the things that you can look up, which is really helpful, is what are the admission scores needed, or what are the standardized test scores needed for admission at a particular school. That's one of the things that they publish. So you could say, okay, 75% of all the students who went to this school scored above X. And when you know that number, you can start to use that as a guide for you. It's like, hey, if I want to go to the school and have a decent shot, like I really need to be above that 25 percentile line. Now, of course, once you're in your junior year, your GPA is mostly fixed, right? Because when you apply to college, you have 3 years worth of classes, but 2.5 of those years have already happened. So if you're trying to improve your chances of admissions, GPA, it is what it is. It's not really a lever that you can pull very hard anyway for improving admissions chances. SAT and ACT score, on the other hand, is the only objective part of your college admissions application that you can make a big movement on in a short period of time, right? Everyone's starting out of the gate same time. And so you can make a big impact there if you apply yourself. So that's what we're here to talk about, is how to do that. So let's drill down a little bit into test prep. Within the scope of test prep, you've got two different types of ways you can apply yourself. The first is what I'm going to call content knowledge. Content knowledge is, do you know the formulas of geometry? Do you understand standard rules of American English grammar, etc.? Right? It's the stuff that they're testing you on. Then you've got test taking skills. Test taking skills is knowing the pacing of the test, knowing how to fill out a bubble sheet, knowing efficient ways to do both of those things, not getting confused about what they're asking and when, etc. And what I would suggest that you do is apply yourself most of your time, take 80-20 principle, right? Like apply most of your effort toward real learning and improving in content knowledge. And we've found that there's a tremendous impact that you can have if you simply master those basic skills better. A lot of people come to us having studied that stuff and they're good at it, but they're not great at it. There's a few holes lurking around. And as we find and plug those holes, performance really improves. And what I love about that, and this is part of why I love working in test prep, is that as you help people fill in those holes, that's a virtuous activity. Not only are you improving your admissions chances and some brass tacks, but you're helping people learn to be a better writer, better reader, and understand math. And that's a really virtuous thing to be doing. So this can be a really good use of your time if you're applying yourself in a way that's going to pay back later in life. We got a question coming in here, which is, do some colleges want you to take one test over the other? No. We're going to cover this a little bit later, but one of the things that has changed in the last decade is now all colleges accept the SAT or the ACT pervasively, so you can take whichever one you want. We'll come back to that. So you're a parent. What are the mandatory steps in this test prep and college application journey that you really need to be focused on, right? So I'm going to give you a checklist. Not only that, but I'm going to break down the roles of the other groups. Let's start with the student. We, of course, know the student needs to practice, 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 get better at all of these skills, and the student needs to show up on game day and perform. That's a really heavy task. There's a bunch of other things that are really tasks better suited to a parent. These tend to deal with long-term planning, for example. So things that I suggest that you consider yourself the owner of as a parent are the following. You can write this stuff down. These are all things you don't want to drop the ball on. The first one, picking a test. Should I do the SAT or the ACT? Which one of those are you going to focus on? You only need to pick one. 2, making a test prep timeline, right? So what test dates are you going to sign up and sit for? And also back off from that 3 to 4 months of diligent prep time and make sure that you get signed up for a program at the beginning of that window, right? Don't count on your child to be doing that type of long-term calendaring and long-term planning. That's something that you'll want to keep track of. The third thing is signing up for the tests, right? You got to actually, put down the credit card, pick a date, sign up. And the last thing is picking or not picking, choosing not to pick a test prep vendor. So again, you don't have to do that. If you are going to, you should think of it as a parent responsibility to make sure that you run that process and make that selection. Don't expect your child to show up saying like, I want to work with Tested, it's, or I picked such and such tutor and I want to work with them. That might happen once in a blue moon, but if you want it to happen, you as the parent really need to be proactive on that front. Guidance counselor in the school, in some states, all schools require that all students take either the SAT or the ACT pervasively. And if you're in one of those states, that's a good thing to know. That's a great service that your school's providing. You get one free shot. Also, guidance counselor will provide you with general information. Do not rely on them to provide you with what we call a catalyst. Don't be waiting for them to say, okay, parents, it's time for you to sign up for the SAT. So a lot of schools don't send that message at all. If you do get that message, most of the time you're getting that too late, right? It's like, hey, if you haven't done this already, you really want to get on top of that. And you're like, oh, what happened? How come nobody told me this? Well, so I'm here telling you now, and don't wait for them. Lastly, you've got any vendors that you work with. So Testive, that's us. We're a test prep vendor. If you work with us, we can help you do things like consulting on goals, how you set a target score, building a test prep plan, how long it needs to be, how much work you need to do each week, what things you should focus on, etc. We'll also instruct the students. We'll take that off your hands, making sure that they're on task every week. We're going to monitor their progress. We will check in on them every single day, and we will send reports to you once a week with some kind of updates so that you know what we were hoping to achieve this week and whether that happened, what's on track, what's not on track. That's a really great stress reliever when you have somebody that's keeping track of those things for you. So that's one of the things that we provide. Should my child take the SAT or the ACT? All right, let's dig into this. The short answer is it doesn't really matter. The SAT and the ACT test nearly identical knowledge. People really, really stress over it. Should I take the SAT or the ACT? And part of the reason why that's such a hard decision is because there's no good way to make it because it doesn't really matter. The one thing that I will counsel you on is that preparing for both of them is really confusing because they have different formats, right? Like the length of the sections are different. The number of questions are in there, the timing, all of that stuff is just different. So it's like trying to write with your left hand when you take the other one. It's just super awkward if you've been doing it one way to try to switch to the other one. So what matters is not which one you take. What matters is picking one and sticking with that one. And all colleges accept either one. So there will be no scenario where you have to take the ACT or you have to take the SAT in order to apply to a certain school. So how do you make that decision? There's a few small cases where you have to take the SAT, so you might want to know about that. So first of all, if you're a national merit semifinalist, you have to take the SAT. Well, you have to take the SAT if you want to apply for the scholarship that they're offering you. I should say this happens for 1% of PSAT test takers. So most of you will not have to worry about this. If you're in that top 1%, they'll let you know. So don't worry. There'll be some external constraint there. It's also not a big deal. You don't have to do it. Second thing is SAT subject tests. There are still, so this is the minority of colleges, but there are still some colleges out there that require SAT subject tests. SAT subject tests have nothing to do with the main SAT. This is a completely different thing. It just happens to have the SAT brand on it. So I'm not really going to cover that in much detail tonight. And also, but I'll give you some of the strategic thought behind it, which is I wouldn't worry about SAT subject tests until later in the cycle. You want to focus on the main SAT or ACT, whichever you're going to do, and getting prepared for that. That is a much, much bigger driver of admissions than SAT subject tests. They're more of like a checkbox type of thing. Some states require the SAT or the ACT. If you're in one of those states, first of all, figure out whether you're in one of those states. So I would Google, do I have to take the SAT or ACT in Georgia? Type that in, see if that's the case. If you're required to take a test in your state, I would just focus and stick with that particular test. There's no great reason for you to switch, and I would just stay on the beaten path, basically. That pretty much covers it. Now, there's some of you whose situations I haven't covered. You're like, well, I haven't done any, like my state doesn't require it, and I'm not a national merit semifinalist, so what am I supposed to do? Well, if you've done some prepping already, even no matter how small the amount of work you've done, if you've done any amount of work, or your child, has done any amount of prep work already, just have them stick with that test, right? That's a really good way to go. And if not, if you really or you're just totally coming at this thing blue sky and there's really nothing pushing you in either direction, I would fall back on taking the test that you've heard more of your friends doing, because you're more likely to be able to find vendors in your area. You're more likely to find a testing center in your area for that test. So there's some logistic things, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter. Just pick one. How many times should my child take the SAT or the ACT? So one thing to know here is there have been some recent score policy changes that really dramatically affect the strategy in this camp. When I took the SAT to get into college, this was back when if you reported your scores to schools, you had to send all of them. So you didn't want to take a test unless you were sure you were going to do pretty good, because you didn't want that on your sort of permanent record. All that has changed. Now you choose what scores to send to colleges. So only the best score matters. And even if score choice is a thing where you can only send the scores you want to send. So you have that control as a consumer. But even if you didn't, colleges aren't looking at your full portfolio. They have an online thing. You just tell them what your score is, and they just trust that. And then someday later, they have somebody go back and check to make sure you're not lying. But it's not like they're looking at this dossier of all your scores for all time and really looking at the highs and the lows and all that. They're mostly just you get a number and that's your number. And what they're looking at is your best score, best ever score. Low scores don't hurt you at all. And some schools even will do something they call super scoring, which is where they allow you to take your best section of all time and match it up with your best other section of all time and create kind of a Frankenstein's monster score and submit that. So if you have on one sitting, you got your best math score, and another sitting, you got your best verbal score, you can put those together and make an even better performance. So all of that comes down to people taking the test more times. So what that means for you strategically is that when you're planning your schedule, you want to allow time in your schedule to take the test 3 times. You don't have to take it 3 times, but you need to have time to take it 3 times. That's really important, because times 2 and 3, those are your backups. So if you don't have time for backups, then you can end up with a really stressed out child who's sitting through a test that they know they really have no other recourse for if they don't do well. That's not a happy test experience. All right. So when should your child start preparing for the ACT or the SAT? First of all, prep timing is highly personal. I'm going to propose some sane default schedules that you can use to get a sense of when you should start doing prep. But what you really need to do is get on the phone with us and talk to us about your specific situation. Tell us about you, what sports your child plays, and what their academic situation is, and what prep they've done already, and when they want to apply to college, and where they want to apply to. All that stuff will help bake that into a personalized timeline for you. And there are extenuating circumstances that change things. So we're happy to take those calls. We do this all day, every day. It's completely free and it's fantastic. And you can schedule an appointment to speak to one of us at testiv.com. You can do that anytime. Okay, so let's talk about some sane default schedules. So the first one of these is for parents of 2020 graduates. So these are currently sophomores. Now this is the best timeline, and you'll see why in a moment. This is the best timeline because it's very flexible. And so here's how it works. What I suggest that you do is that you plan to prepare for your first sitting where you have a major effort, right? So you're going to prep beforehand and plan to do your best job and hope that this is your last time ever taking the test. That you plan to do your prep during the summer before junior year. So you start as soon as school lets out for sophomore year, you do your prep over the summer. Then you do your first test right at the end of summer. So it's September or October, depending on whether you're taking the SAT or the ACT. One major benefit of this is that most students find it easiest to prepare during the summer, especially if you're in a structured program, because that's going to be competing a lot less with the academic demands of high school. So that's why summer tends to be better for people. So people are able to put in more time, better time. They improve more, and they're happier. So there's many reasons to do it during the summer if you can. Now, another thing that this benefit this provides is by preparing the summer before junior year, you have a built-in backup test date option. And that's really important because the existence of the backup takes the pressure off the first test, which allows you to perform better on the first test. So by having time for the backup, it has this weird way of not being, it's like if you have time for a backup, you're less likely to need it. And if you don't have time for a backup, you really wish you did, you know? So it's nice to set your schedule this way so you've got that backup. And when is that backup period? Well, you prep during your junior year then, and you plan to take your second test in May or June of that junior year. After that's over, if you still don't have the score that you need to go to the school that you want, each one of these 4 triangles over here on the right side are what I call last chance tests. So you have one more run. You can pick one of those 4, right? And you can do one more run where you go for it and you see what happens. And that gives you just one more chance to see if you can get your score to where you need it. Now let's look at another timeline. This timeline is for 2019 graduates. So this is for juniors, current juniors, who haven't prepared yet. So if you've already done some prep, like if you've already taken a course, this doesn't completely apply to you because there are other tests that you might want to take. But so this is for people that are just getting started right now. This is the schedule that you're on, and this schedule doesn't have very much flexibility. It's pretty much what you kind of have to do is your first test should be the May or June test this year, which is coming up. And you want to get started in earnest on some kind of structured prep program immediately so that you have 3 or 4 months of serious prep before that date. The reason why that's really important is because you want to make that first test a serious attempt. You don't want to make it sort of a halfway attempt where you're planning to need to take it again. You want to try to make it a serious attempt where you can get the score that you need and be done. The reason why that's important is because you want to treat this second, so I've got in this timeline here, a second backup test date for you, which is you prep during the summer after junior year, and then you take your second test in September or October before senior year. And that's sort of a last chance date because there really aren't any more test dates before some of the like early action, early admissions college application deadlines happen, which I've got as a dotted line on here. If you're applying to some of the lesser competitive schools, the deadlines tend to be a little bit later. And so you might have time. I have another like ACT last chance squeezed in here right at the end of the calendar year. So you might be able to squeeze that in. Here's one thing you really don't want to do, which is please don't wait until senior year summer to start your main first run at prep. So if you're a parent of a junior, you haven't done any prep right now, some people are contemplating the following. They're thinking, well, let's sign up for the May test and see how it goes. Depending on what happens there, then we'll sign up for a prep program over the summer. please don't do that. If you do that, what you're setting yourself up for is a situation where your child's in a structured prep program for the first time, and they're planning to do their first serious attempt, at this admissions test in September or October of their senior year with no backup options. And that's like an uber stressful, that's an uber stressful journey. So you really don't want to do that. By being here today and getting this information now, you're able to get in front of this thing, get into a prep program now, and then you built in that backup option, which allows you to be a little bit lower stress for the May or June test this year. So that's the virtue of it. So here's a quick summary of that. For 2019 grads, time is short. Sign up for a prep program that starts right now. Log at least 3 months of prep before a spring test to sign up for May or June. For 2020 grads, either sophomores, sign up now for a prep program which starts during the summer. So get started right when school lets out. So that's like May, June-ish. Prep during the summer, and then take the test, the first SAT or ACT that occurs at the conclusion of summer. So you're looking at September, October timeframe for those tests. Okay, so how do you improve your scores? One of the great things about test prep is that it bends to the typical science of mastery. Just like if you want to better your basketball game, you can apply yourself at the subcomponents of that, and you'll end up being a better basketball player. You get better at dribbling, better at shooting, better free throws, etc. You can do the exact same thing with the SAT and the ACT. They're absolutely non-magical, right? It's composed of a known set of sub-skills, right? If you master geometry and trigonometry and algebra, and you understand the basic rules of American English grammar, and you've worked through how to pick apart critically a reading passage and understand what arguments the author's making, you can apply yourself to improving in those things in a short period of time, make noticeable improvement, and improve your scores. And at the same time, you will be mastering that underlying content, which is going to work for you for the rest of your life. So one of the things that's great to let your children know and to tell yourself is that, hey, this is something that I can do. And Testiv, what's great about Testiv is our program where we match up. So we have two things. We have a piece of software, which is enforcing really good behavior. So it's pathing people through practice questions, practice tests, answer videos, and it's showing them what to do and when, and it's enforcing really good behavior. You also have a one-on-one human coach who's going to meet with your student every week, and that person is going to be monitoring that same performance and checking in with your child to make sure that they're adhering to the best practices that we have shown to be effective. So not only do we have a process that is known to work, but we check in with people on a regular basis to make sure that it's actually happening. And all of this works exactly as you'd expect, right? You put in the time reviewing tape and practicing your basics, and you get better at basketball. Same thing is true of test prep. You spend your time doing practice questions, reviewing them when you get them wrong, documenting your learnings, and very quickly you start to improve at that underlying stuff. So here's how that works. The first thing you need to do when you start prep is you need to get a baseline score. What this means is sit down for a full-length practice test, just like you would if you were taking the real test. So you want to make this as authentic and experienced as possible. So you want to get a real retired SAT or ACT test, one that was actually used for judging real students. We have versions of SAT and ACT tests in PDF format at testiv.com that you can go and get, and you can use today. It costs nothing. Sit down and take that with a stopwatch using the timing that the actual test requires. When you're done, you take all your scores, you plug them into Testiv, and we will score it for you. And not only that, but we will work out an analysis of that and tell you your strengths and your weaknesses. So all of that happens right when you take that practice test for the first time. Next, set a goal score. The best way to set a goal score is not what your friends are doing, and it's not what your average score at your school is, or what your friend told you a good score is. None of that matters. What matters to you is whether you have the score that you need to go to the college that you want to go to. So what we always suggest people do is they start their college search. And you don't have to finish your college search, but look at a few schools that you feel good about, or just pick some, right? Pick some of your local schools if you want to just get a sense of what you're looking at, and look at the average admission scores for those schools. All that stuff is published publicly, so you can look up, University of Miami average SAT score for admissions, and they publish that information. So get that number, and then if you want to go to that school, think of that as your target. Okay, then you can compare that target against your performance to figure out where you stand. Maybe you're already above target. That's great. If you're very close to target, then you need to polish up around the edges. If you're a ways off of your target, then you're looking at something a little bit more serious. Then go one step further. Break that down. Not just math, reading, and writing, but go one step further. What's my ability in geometry, trig, algebra, etc., and figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. When you find out what your weaknesses are, that's great. Having a weakness is excellent, because then you know where you can go to do your work to improve. Practice regularly in those weak areas. This is easier said than done. It's easy and fun to practice in your strong areas because that's creatively engaging to you, but it's less important. Really like forcing yourself to buckle down and go outside your comfort zone and master things that you've never been very good at. That is where all the true virtue in learning lies, is making yourself more well-rounded. And that tends to have a bigger impact on scores. So practice regularly in the weakest areas. Testive will automatically our software will automatically path students through their weak areas. So they don't even really need to pay attention to that. We're just keeping track of it all the time and making sure that what comes up next is something that's a good thing for them to focus on. Review your failures. So every single time you get a question wrong, what you won't need to do is stop and look up the information needed to figure out what happened. So at Testive, we have a video recording of every single question that your children will be answering, and we interrupt their flow and show them that video. We say, okay, you answered that question wrong. Watch this and keep going until you figure out what happened. Once they figure out what happens, we then ask them to document that. Say in your own words, write down what you're going to do differently next time in that same situation. And what they're actually doing is writing their own textbook, right? This is the best book that they'll ever have for preparing for the SAT or the ACT, is that list of things that they personally need to do differently. And lastly, report that improvement back out. So once a week, the coach that's working with your child will put together a summary of plan for that week, the actions that happened, what's going well, what's going badly, and they'll send that out to you. So everybody will be on the same page with what's happening and or not happening. So that you can manage that process and you can relax because you know that somebody's watching and they're keeping you up to date. Then repeat. You start going around and around on this until you hit your goal score. That's how you get the job done. So everything that we just covered is completely manageable. And if you're working with a Testive coach and using the Testive software, all of that will be managed for you, meaning you just have to show up and do the work. Or your child has to show up and do that work. And our coaches will even help them do that. The challenge, the thing that really holds people back, is getting started, right? So every day that goes by that you're not in a program is 1 week less that you've got to get prepared for that test date deadline. So you want to get started as soon as you can. Optimal prep time is like 3 to 4 months. Depending on how much time you have to put in. If you don't have as much time to put in, you might want to go for a 5th month. If you have tons of time to put in, you could do it in 3. But you need to figure out how to get started. So I'm sure you've discovered a few things that don't work when it comes to trying to get your kids to start test prep. It's not fun to try to spend your goodwill nagging your children to get started on this. Honestly, there's more important battles for you to fight, to spend your goodwill on than this stuff. So what I suggest instead is outsource it. Find a great program, find a vendor that knows what they're doing, that's experienced in this, sign up for a program, find somebody that your children like, and get them started doing that. So if you work with us at Testive, one of the things that we'll do immediately is we'll help you pick a test date, sign up for it, and get that on the calendar. And that's a really, really great way to help kick things off, because a test that kind of might be in May, maybe if we sign up for it, that's not a real thing. But once you pick that test, you sign up for it, you put it on the calendar in bold, now it's real, and it makes a lot more sense for everybody to really get in gear and start preparing for that. So we'll help you figure out what to do and help you take action and make sure that gets done. And we'll walk you through the whole rest of the process, of course. So what is the most common thing that goes wrong? From the student perspective, when we look at performance retrospectively, what we find is the single biggest thing that people regret is not putting in enough time. The driver of score improvement by far is time on task, right? If you put in the hours and you're studying good content, you will improve. It's just a matter of time, right? Like we're just learning algebra, like if you just spend time with it, eventually you'll master it. The thing that really gets people is they don't put in that time. They have, their test prep program is based on best intentions, and it doesn't actually happen. So here's some data. This is the horizontal axis here is number of months using Testive. The vertical axis is average score improvement. And so what you can see, and so the two different colors here, the light blue, this is Testive students working with a tutor. This is our normal way of doing business, right? You start working with us, we match you up with a tutor. The bottom line is what we have some students that are just working with Testive with no coach. So we make our software available to people who want that, and for free. And you guys can use that. But what you can see here is that they both improve at about the same rate for a little while, but then students that aren't working with a coach, they kind of just start to peter out. And what happens when you work with a coach is the coach helps you stick with it. And when you stick with it, that's when you start to get outsized returns, because it's not the first month where you generate all the improvement. It's the second, third, fourth, fifth month that you put that time in that really starts to make a difference. Coaching students do, as a group, 6 times more work, and they raise their scores 3 times higher than the people that are just preparing on their own. That's even with our software. So how do we do this? So we use a combination of one-on-one human coaches. So this is a real person, meets with your student every week, same person every week, so you have a relationship there. And they guide your child through this process. They'll also work with you if you have questions. And then the student, when they're not with their coach, so when they're on their own, they'll have a really specific homework assignment that they have committed to during that coaching session. When I say specific, I mean like how many questions, what day of the week, what time of day. And the coach will monitor those commitments and check in with them by text message to say congratulations when they do that stuff, or to say, hey, I thought you were going to do problems about an hour ago. What happened? And to try to save that day. And then what they'll do is they'll summarize all that stuff and keep you in the loop with a weekly update. Here are some of our coaches. I can't show all of our coaches on here. We have many of them. They're all very colorful and interesting in different ways. They're all seasoned educators, people that love working with students. We screen them for whether they can function as role models. Basically, we want all of our children matched with coaches that they want to be like. So either they go to the school that the child wants to go to, they play the same sport, or they have similar hobby or some kind of connection. Also, all of our coaches score in the 99th percentile on whatever they're tutoring. So they're in the top 1% of performers on all those things. So we've answered all the questions that we set out to answer today on the webinar. Thank you so much for coming. The very next step is to take some action. It's important that you do this. Don't let this get away from you. The next step that I suggest that you take is talk to one of our student success advisors and make a testing timeline specifically for you and your family, right? So I went through some generic timelines today, but what you want to do is talk to somebody and make sure that that really is a fit for you. pick a test date and then pull the trigger on getting that signed up for. We will help you do that. It's no obligation. It doesn't cost anything to go to one of these consultations. We'll give you great advice and help get you set up, whether or not you work with us. And of course, we hope you do. But if you don't, that's okay too. Some good questions that you can ask on that call are all the same things that we covered today, but with a personal focus. Should my child take the SAT or the ACT? How should my child, when should they take it? How do I get my child to start prep? I mean, you can talk about specifics. And, how am I going to fit this into my schedule? How much time does it actually take per week? And, can I make this work? And we're happy to go over all of that stuff with you. If you want to get started right now, you can go to testive.com. You can sign up. You can also go to testive.com and talk with us in the chat. We've got a live chat there. Danny, Molly, and Lorena are all working right now, and they could be happy to talk with you. Or you can send us email. We email corresponded with all you guys setting up the session. Just hit reply and ask whatever you want. We'll be happy to respond. All right, let's switch over to some Q&A. Danny's got a question here. Should we be preparing for the PSAT? That's really, your own choice. So most schools have students taking the PSAT the fall of junior year. Some schools are now giving the PSAT to students in the fall of the sophomore year and even the fall of the freshman year, and sometimes make that optional, but you can take the test there. Personally, what I would have my student do is just prepare for and take the actual SAT. So if you look back to the timeline that I was suggesting, what I'm saying is take your current sophomores who are rising juniors, have them start preparing in the summer for the SAT in the fall. The SAT and the PSAT are almost exactly the same. So by preparing for the SAT, you are preparing for the PSAT. So to boil down your question, if you think of the prep process for the PSAT and the SAT as being identical, should you prepare for the PSAT? Yeah, because you should be preparing ideally the summer before junior year. And so you're going to cover both, you're going to kill both birds with that same one stone. If you're, the PSAT has no impact on college admissions whatsoever. So you can think of it as just practice SAT. But if you're prepping, you might as well sign up for an actual test date as well. So what you'll have in the fall is you'll have a real SAT test date, and then you'll also have the school's PSAT date, and they'll just do both of those. The PSAT date will be during school. The SAT will be, on the weekend. And the SAT that you take, that'll count for college admissions, which is awesome. And if you're on that timeline, you're doing awesome. And the PSAT is not that important for you, right? Because you're already doing the real deal. Now, if you want to, there's a small reason why you might want to prepare for and crush the PSAT, which is if you're shooting for the National Merit Scholarship. So the top 1% of performers on the PSAT get that scholarship. I think it's $10,000, something like that. So if you think you're in the top 1%, you're planning to be in the top 1% anyway, yeah, you might as well go for it on the PSAT, and you're going to be in the top 1% and you're going to get the scholarship money. So there's a nice double bonus right there. Another question. How many times a year is the SAT offered? What about the ACT? They're both offered 7 times a year. And you can look up test dates by Googling SAT 2018 test dates or ACT 2018 test dates. The thing to know about the test dates is that it may seem like, you might say, oh, there's 7 tests a year. There's so many of those. What ends up happening in actuality is that you can't take back-to-back test dates for a variety of reasons. You can't. One of the things that's interesting is I've come to believe that it's basically impossible for somebody to prepare for the SAT while they're waiting to get their scores back from an SAT they've already taken, if that makes sense. Once you take it, you're like, all right, the ball's in the air, and there's this tremendous pressure to rest and see where that ball lands before you commit again. Well, so what ends up happening is that you can really only take the test about once per season. So that's how I encourage people to think of it, right? It's like you've got summer, spring, and fall. You can take it once in the summer, once in the spring, once in the fall. And there's a variety of test dates in each one of those seasons, but that's sort of a limitation from a human perspective on what you can do. If you start looking up test dates, you're going to get quickly bogged down in like, oh my gosh, this is complicated. So if you really want to try to get to the bottom of that, I suggest you call us and we'll work through all of it with you. This is what we do all the time, so it's not complicated to us. Question, how much preparing should you do every week? What we have most of our students doing is 30 minutes per day, about 4 days a week. So it's not counting the time that they spend with their tutor and also not counting time that they do on practice tests, which are not every week. And I think of that as sort of the minimum, right? So like if you really want to make a go of it, you need to be able to put in 2.5 to 3 hours a week. That's what I would call real prep. You can go up from there. So you can go up to, an hour a day, 5 days a week. That would be serious prep. That would be like really serious prep. Somebody who's like really burning hot. Over the summer, it's not hard to put in an hour a day, 5 hours or 5 days a week. That's sort of normal. And for that reason, people tend to prep for shorter intervals over the summer. If you prep during the school year, people are more on the like half an hour a day plan. And so they end up prepping for a longer time period. So it's like 5 months during the year or 3 months during the summer. It's kind of what it comes out to in terms of like arcing up to your full potential. All right, I think I'm running low on questions that came in through the chat. There's a few more in the live chat. Regarding test by state, is this the state you live in or the state you're applying to? The state you live in, that's a good question. When I said there are some states that require students to take it, it's this is at the high school level, and what they're doing is like the state has made a deal with College Board and said like, hey, instead of like, we need to give some tests to all of our high schools to see all of our high school students junior year to see like whether they're prepared and how well the school is working. And they actually use the SAT or the ACT for that school assessment. It's very political. So I'm not going to get into whether that's like a good idea or not, but as it is, that happens. So if you're in one of those states, you'll be taking that test. And the way to know whether you're in it is where you go to high school. What state is that in? And also I'm referring to public school students. And in some states, charter schools are included. If you're private, all bets are off. Like the school's going to do what they do, and you got to go to the school level to figure out what happens. You do not need to use the scores from those for college admissions. Just like any of your other ones, you can just dump those scores if you don't like them. Of course, you don't need to do that because colleges don't care if they see extra scores. Let me pull up. So if you have any, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to type them into the chat right now. I'm going to pull up the emails that people sent in right before this and make sure that we got everybody. And after that, we're going to wrap. Does Testive offer an online course with an instructor, or is it online based? So everything is online. There is a real human coach who will meet with your child virtually. So they'll work using Google Hangout or Skype or something like that. So they'll do a face-to-face. It'll be the same person every week. And you'll have a relationship. So it's just like meeting with an in-person tutor, except you don't have to drive anywhere. Why Testive? How are you better than your competitors? So one of the really big differences between us and most competition is yeah, I don't really think of them as competitive, but like a lot of test prep programs are either pure human, meaning like we're just a tutor matching service, or they're an online tool with no human coach. What we do is both. So we have a state-of-the-art tech tool that students use to do all their prep. They can do it anywhere they want. It guides them through the material, keeps track of strengths and weaknesses, enforces good behaviors. It's like training wheels for learning. It's great. Not only that, but it takes all that information, feeds it to a coach. So their coach has heads-up display about what's going on in the student's world. So when they meet, it's a super duper productive session, right? So like if students aren't doing their homework, like we're all over that, In fact, like it's not really possible for a student to get to a session having done nothing, because we'll see that day of, and the coach will be texting with the student day of, like, hey, what happened? And so when they get to the session, they'll already have conversed about that, and they'll be back on plan. So in the session, they can talk about things like strengths and weaknesses. So that's a really big difference. You know, I was a private tutor for a long time, and like this is a tool I always wanted to have. So I kind of built the tool for myself that I wish I had had. And now that I've used it, like I can never go back. I can never go back to just like tutoring, where you meet someone in a coffee shop and just like try to figure out like a detective whether they did their homework. Like, oh, it's brutal. You spend like half the session just trying to suss out whether they did any work last week, which of course they never have. How long will my child have access to Testive? What is the cost? So we charge you on a subscription basis. It's $350 per month, and that includes all the software, and it includes all your sessions with the coach. That's unlimited access to the coach by text and email, and it's one meeting with the student once per week in real time. We covered all this stuff. Here's a good question, which is, what are the tips and techniques for mastering the reading portion of the SAT? Our son has a good grasp on math, but struggled with the reading section. So the reading section is harder to improve on than the math section. And the reason why, I think, is because the math is easier to break down into masterable subcategories. Reading, you can break down a little bit, but eventually you just get to the point where you're like, okay, you have to understand this paragraph of text really well. And if you don't, I can't break it down into words. You know, like a sentence has a structure, and a paragraph has a structure. So for mastering reading, there's two categories of things you can do. One is there's a whole bunch of test-taking techniques that make a huge, huge difference. That'll bump your score a whole bunch just by mastering that, which means like, what order do you answer the questions and read through the passage? How do you get going so that you have speed and fluidity through that stuff? Remember that time is a huge component on these tests. So mastering the mechanics of how to move through things in the right order really makes a big difference, because every second counts, right? So if you can figure out a system where you have, like for me, when I was like, for a long time, I was trying to get a perfect score on the SAT, and just like, because I'm a test prep nerd. And like what made the difference for me was I figured out a different way of bubbling that was really weird, that allowed me an extra 30 seconds on a section. And that 30 seconds allowed me to like really focus on one extra super hard math question. And that's what unlocked it for me. So anyway, I'm not saying you have to get to that level, but there are some like little things you can do in reading that help give you more time. And just having extra time and being more efficient will allow you to score better. Particularly if you struggle with reading comprehension. One of the things that can make that really hard is that you're under time pressure, which doesn't help. Right? Like if you're like, oh, I'm a little confused, and people are like, you're confused? Okay, great. Well, let's do this really fast now. You're like, that's not helping. You know, so if you can come up with a systematic approach to how you're going to attack that, it allows you to kind of like quell those demons and like really focus on what you're doing. And that can make a big impact. Beyond that, the next thing that makes a difference is it's time on task doing critical reading. So sometimes I hear the advice, it's like, oh, you should read Time magazine. I think that's sort of mediocre prep strategy. Like engaging with good literature outside of test prep is a good idea on its own for improving reading comprehension in life in general. I'm not sure that it's the fastest route to the top of the mountain in terms of score improvement. If I were going to go for that, what I would be doing is I would be spending more time with real retired SAT and ACT reading passages. So time on task reading that stuff is going to have enormous impact. And, you know, if you're struggling with it, you probably need to put in more time. I'd say like 8 times out of 10. That's really what you need, is just like forced time on task repetition. And then it tends to break. All right, Danny, is there anything else that I haven't gotten to, or should we shut down? Hang on, I see Danny typing. Let's just take a second for one more. Okay, let's wrap it up for the day. Thank you guys for coming out. once again, if you're looking for the next action, head over to testive.com and sign up for a consultation to talk about a test prep timeline for you and your child. Thank you so much for coming out. It was an honor talking to you guys. Thanks for the great questions. This was a really good session. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you enjoy the experience, and happy prepping.